All right. So hello and welcome. I'm in the Director of Community Engagement with Tacoma Pierce County Habitat, and I see a couple of new names. Actually, I think everybody here, I recognize Shelly. I recognize your name, Shelly, but Shelly's been out. She's actually kind of become one of our construction regulars now. So, but I don't think you've been to a Women Build event before,
Nope.
have you?
Nope.
Okay, great. And then Stephanie, who's also on the call, is a brand new Women Build member. She'll be coming out for a Build Day with us this Saturday. And then there's one other person, Lene, who is connecting now. So Caitie here, who you're seeing on the screen, hopefully, well, you're seeing all of us on screen, the one waving. Caitie is one of our Women Build crew chiefs, and she's been leading 2 of these skills sessions a month since March, since everything kind of went virtual. And we just yesterday planned out a schedule to continue these. We've added another instructor along with Caitie, so Caitie doesn't have to do all of the work by herself. So Caitie will still be teaching the first Wednesday of the month, and then we have another gal named Sandy who will be teaching the third Wednesday of the month, starting in January. And Sandy's got some expertise that complements Caitie's really well. She's got some plumbing experience and hardwood flooring experience. So we're excited to be able to offer some new sessions. Not that we don't love doing this with Caitie all the time, but Caitie would probably like a little break from being the only one on. So I'm going to mute myself and turn off my video. And ask everybody else to stay muted too, unless you have a question. It's a small enough group that you can pretty much just jump in, unmute yourself, jump in anytime you've got a question. Caitie will also pause now and then to ask if anybody's got questions about what she's going over, but just feel free to jump in anytime also. So go ahead, Caitie. I'll be quiet and let you take off.
Sounds good. Yeah, like Tracy said, we're happy to be continuing our Women Build workshops and glad to see some new faces, and yeah, hoping to continue. Tonight I'm going to be teaching about framing, and if anybody needs like logistical things like sound, or if the lighting is weird, just let us know. And please feel free to ask questions at any point. Ideally, we would be doing these workshops in person, and we get to do some of this stuff hands-on and get to feel the materials and use the tools and stuff. That being said, I still want this to be interactive, even though we're over Zoom. So if you have questions or want to know about something specific, or feels too basic or too complicated or whatever, just let me know. Happy to kind of tailor it to what you guys are interested in learning. And if not, I'm just going to roll on with my regular plan, which is I would like to go through some of the kind of materials that we use in framing. So our lumber, our sheathing materials, what are they? What's the difference? Talk about that. Talk a little bit about the tools we use, which are pretty basic for this workshop. And then I'm going to talk about how to do layout for a wall, and show you guys how to put together like a mini wall here, and then go through some of the concepts of framing in terms of putting walls together. And like, I guess I'm thinking of it in a pretty simple, we're not going to learn how to build a house tonight, but like if you wanted to build a shed in your backyard, how do you build the 4 walls for that kind of level of framing, which includes quite a bit. So yeah, I'm just going to jump right in. And if you have questions, feel free to chat, raise your hand, or just unmute yourself and ask them. So I thought to start, we would talk a little bit about the material, which is a good place to start when we're framing. So in terms of lumber, there's, I guess, 2 different things to know about. So, or 2 names that the lumber can go by. We're going to call it a 2x4 or a 2x6. So this is what I call the nominal name. Like, what do we call it? And then there's the actual size of the lumber. So a 2x4 or a 2x6, that's what we're going to use for any kind of wall framing. And I can go through when you would use which one in a second, but just know, like, throughout this workshop, I'm calling this piece of wood here a 2x4. It is not actually 2 inches by 4 inches. So that's a pretty common not misconception, but just something to be aware of as we're taking measurements and like the thickness of our wall or how tall we need to cut something. Even though we're calling it a 2x4, it's actually 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. So it's a ½ inch shorter in both the width and the thickness of the board. Why that is, I'm not really sure. I think something to do with like the milling process. If you can look at this board, it's, you know, it's not super rough. It's got these nice smooth corners. So it's been milled and kind of prettied up. So it's not an actual true dimensional 2x4. So just wanted to point that out because once we start talking about layout, that's going to become a bit more important to know those actual sizes. Same thing for a 2x6. So 2, again, that's this smaller side, that's 1.5 inches, and our 2x6 going this way is 5.5. So nominal versus the actual size of the lumber. Wanted to start with that just to clear that up, but we're still going to refer to them as 2x4s and 2x6s. And that is what we're going to be using to frame our walls. So typically walls will be 2x4. The only times when you would want a 2x6 wall is sometimes we can use 2x6s for our exterior walls. You don't have to. I think that would be dependent on like the code in your area, but basically a 2x6 is a lot thicker, well, a little bit thicker than a 2x4. So if that's our wall, we can fit more insulation inside the wall. If you're not living anywhere where you need to insulate, or you're building a shed, something that doesn't need any insulation at all, 2x4s are perfectly sufficient for that use. The other place we would use 2x6 is if we had a wall that was going to have like a big plumbing pipe running through it. And this is primarily for like a laundry room, something that's got like a bigger pipe running through it. If you're just using like a bathroom or hooking up a toilet or sink, that can run through a 2x4. But basically, if it's a thick pipe, like a 2 or 3 inch pipe, we don't want to be completely cutting out our stud. That's going to mess with the integrity of our wall. So in that case, we would want to use a thicker wall or fur out our wall to make it thick enough that it still has sufficient strength, even if it has a hole drilled through it. So that's that for lumber. We will get to sheathing at the end, but I did want to talk briefly about nails and the difference for the differences between nails and screws and galvanized and non-galvanized nails. So when we are framing, we are using nails. And I've had this question before, why don't we use screws? Screws, you know, obviously have a thread around them, like this, right? It's threaded. That's going to make it really great for holding something down or holding something in. So I might use that to screw down a floor, you know, some kind of underlayment for a floor or something. A screw would be really good because it's not going to pop up or down. But nails that are just a smooth shank nail, no threads, right? These have shear strength. And what that means is strength going this way. So if I put this into a stud and try to knock out the stud, it's going to be really hard to do that. Whereas if I had a screw, I could break it a lot easier. Screws don't have any shear strength, so it's not going to keep anything from going, you know, basically shear, I'm talking about perpendicular to my nail. It doesn't have any strength this way, so that's why we want to use nails for framing as opposed to screws. There would be maybe some instances where you could use screws, you know, in construction. It's not that they're not useful, it's just not what we use for framing. So then I wanted to talk about the difference between these two nails. So if we look down here, it's kind of hard to tell, but basically this shiny silvery one, this is a galvanized nail, and it's basically dipped in a material that is going to make it not rust, which means that is what we want to use for exterior uses, meaning something that's going to be exposed to the weather long term. So basically all framing starts outside, but if the end point of my framing project is going to be closed in, dried in, covered with plywood and siding and painted, that does not count as exterior because it's going to get closed in. So in that case, we would just use a regular common nail that's not coated in anything, and that is what we're going to use today. Galvanized, again, would be rust resistant, so exterior uses. And then in terms of size of the nails, we use 16D or 16 penny nails. That's just like the jargon of what they're called. What that is basically referring to is the length of the nail, which these are 3.5 inches thick or long, I'm sorry. And it's also the gauge of the nail. So this is a pretty thick nail. If I compare this to an 8D nail, it's my 8D is 2.5 inches. So it's an inch shorter, and it's skinnier, right? The gauge of the nail is smaller. So this one is beefier. This one, the 8D, that is something that we would use for sheathing, which when I'm saying that, I'm referring to like the OSB or plywood that's going to cover my wall after I've gotten it framed. So we will be using 16D to actually do the framing, meaning putting the studs in the wall or putting joists in our floors. That's what we'd be using. Yeah. Any questions on any of that before I keep going? If anything comes up, feel free to go ahead and ask. So next thing I want to do is I'm going to show you guys an example of this wall that I've already built, and then we will get into layout a little bit, but it helps to kind of have a visual to know what's going on. So this wall is just a mini wall. I've planned it to be 2 feet tall. So I calculated these studs based on my top and bottom plate and the double top plate that's going to go on top. And we're going to go through all of this, but just to get a visual idea, this is one wall, and then I'm going to build another wall, and we'll talk about how to join them together, and then the process that would be sheathing. And I'm also going to show you like a mini window that's got all the components. So it's a bit of terminology, but I did want to go through just visually what this looks like. So we're starting with 2 plates. One of them is a bottom plate, which goes on the bottom of our floor, the bottom of our wall. And then the top plate is obviously the top of our wall. And then the components running vertically, these are called studs. And that's just another jargon term, but basically a stud is something that is pre-cut to a certain length. So if I get 2 by 4 by 8 feet long, it's usually a little bit longer than 8 feet. So it's not actually the perfect dimension. If we get studs, these are cut at a specific length based on the wall size that we want. So if I'm building an 8-foot wall, my stud is 93 inches because it's taking into consideration my top plate, my bottom plate, and my double top plate, so that I don't have to think about that. I don't have to cut every board. It's just pre-cut at a length. If I wanted a 9-foot wall, my stud is 105, I think. So that's, they're referred to studs not just because they're running up and down, but because they're pre-cut lengths. So, and we're going to talk about if we wanted to make a custom size wall, how we could go about figuring out our stud length. And the reason that these are cut at pretty specific lengths is because all of our material in construction is kind of built to match these lengths. So a standard sheet of OSB, well, I guess we could segue to what is OSB and plywood. So a standard sheet of OSB, which is this sheathing material, these are come in standard sizes of 4 feet by 8 feet. So if I build my wall to 8 feet, I can put this directly up and it's already the size, the height that it needs to be. They also come in 9 foot. So that's why we want to kind of stick to these common things if we were to be building something on a big scale, or if we just wanted to save ourselves a lot of work measuring and stuff. But while we're over here, we'll look at this. So OSB stands for Oriented Strand Board, and basically it's a fancy way of saying that these are a bunch of wood chips that we can see that are glued together and pressed together and compact and manufactured into this material that we put up on the wall of our framed wall. So we put that up on one side to enclose in our house or our shed. And OSB is a material that provides shear strength, just like our nails. So basically, if I put this on my wall, if I put this sheet right on here, it's going to provide shear strength from my wall moving like this. So if you're somewhere in Washington State that has earthquakes, there is a certain code regulation that basically says, hey, you need to use OSB and you need to nail it this often to make sure our houses don't wiggle and wobble and fall over super easily. So that is OSB. The other kind of nicer looking, but maybe less functional material is plywood. And can you show the side of this from this edge? So, or yes, maybe get in the light. So plywood is essentially thin sheets of wood that are glued and pressed together. And it's got a nicer finish look on the top edge. So it's more decorative, it's nicer for painting. It does not provide the same shear strength as OSB. So that's just something to take into consideration based on your project. Do you need something super sturdy? Is it mostly just a pretty box that you want to paint and want it to look nice? So those are some things to consider. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead into layout, and feel free to ask questions if you got any. We're going to do the layout up here. So the wall that I just showed you on the floor, this is kind of our starting point for this wall. So what I have here is 2 2x4s because I'm building a 2x4 wall, and I cut them at the same length, and these are my top and bottom plates. So I'm going to do my layout, which that's a fancy way of saying I'm going to mark out where the studs go. So I'm going to do that, and then when I go to build my wall, I have it marked. I have a copy of that layout on the top and the bottom. So like I said, I kind of just pre-planned these walls out. So I chose to have a wall that was 4 foot long by 2 feet tall. So when I am going through that process and trying to figure out how tall to make my studs, I need to take into consideration my overall height, which is 2 feet or 24 inches, and subtract out everything that would contribute to that height that is not the stud. So in this case, that's my top plate, which is 1.5 inches, my bottom plate, which is 1.5 inches, and my double top plate, which I'm just checking my work over here, which is another 1.5 inches. So if I'm starting with 24 and I need to subtract 1.5 inches, 3, 4.5 inches, that would be at 19.5 inches for my stud. So that's how I calculate it. Obviously, if you were doing an 8-foot wall or 9-foot wall, your numbers would change, but it's the same process to figure out what that stud height should be. Okay, then we lay out our wall. So in terms of how often things are supposed to be spaced, there's 2, I guess, formal types of layout, and this is, they are 16 inches on center or 24 inches on center. So if you hear somebody talking about that, they're referring to how often stuff is spaced. And we'll zoom over to this wall because I can do a little visual first. So this wall is 16 inches on center. And what that means is every 16 inches, there's a center of a stud. So there's one at the very end of the wall always. And then 16 inches on center, every 16 inches on center, there's another stud. So 16, 32, if my wall was longer, it would keep going. But that's what somebody is referring to. So if I wanted to build a wall that was 2 foot or 24 inches on center, I would line them up on my every 2 feet. So that's what the difference is with those walls, or with those two forms of layout. And basically, it's standard for your walls to be 16 inches on center. And all this information is coming to you in the form of blueprints that are telling you how to build your house. If you are doing like a shed or a project by yourself, just go 16 inches on center. 2 foot, the only time I see that is interior walls that are non-load bearing, but it doesn't really save you anything to do 2 foot on center. You maybe save like 3 studs if you were building a shed or something. Anyway, so go 16 inches on center. And the reason that those are the two options for 16 or 24 inches on center, like I was saying before, construction material is all built and designed to kind of work universally. So if a standard sheet of plywood or OSB or drywall is 4 feet by 8 foot, both 16 and 24 will land on a 4 foot, basically. I know the math term for that, multiple.
4 feet divisible by 24 and 16.
There we go. Yep. So every like sheet of OSB or drywall will land on a stud, which is important because that's how we nail it or screw it in. So we want to make sure that we're not having to cut every single piece. So those are why those are the options. And I don't know which came first, the layout or the construction material, but those are the choices. So anyway, long-winded to get to layout, but here we are. So to start this, all I need in terms of tools is a tape measure, which if anybody wants me to go over how to read that, I can do it briefly. We also cover it in our tool workshop if you want to come to that one. But this is a good example of a tape measure because I have the cheater things on here, which I don't really love or recommend. I recommend that you learn how to read it and then you don't have to rely on those. But for the purposes of this workshop, it's helpful to demonstrate my layout. So tape measure, pencil, and a speed square, which you will see how I use in just a moment. So for my wall, I want to start with my top plates all the way cut at the same length and then also flush on the end. So when I say flush, I mean it's lined up here. I don't want to start with these off like this, right? This is my copy of how to build the wall. So I want the copy to be the same on the top and the bottom plate, which means I need to start with them in the same place. And then just like our example wall, we always want to start with a stud on the end of the wall. Basically, I don't want these plates just free hanging. So even if it's not a 16-inch on center on the end, we always put one on the end. So I'm putting a 2x4 here, which I know is actually 1.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 1.5 inches. I cut my finger today, so this is a little bit tricky, but okay. 1.5 inches right here. Yep. Okay. And then my next one is, so for right now, it's just a tick mark, and I'll show you how to finish out the lines. when we come back. So my next one is 16 inches on center. And I know that my stud is 1.5 inches thick. So basically I want half of that on this side and half of that on this side. So in order to do that, 1.5 inches divided by 2 is 3/4. 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to go 3/4 ahead, or I guess behind, which is 15 1/4. So that's where I want to make my mark. 15 1/4 right there. Cheater tape coming in handy. And then 3/4 to the other side, which is 16 3/4. And if I were to check this with my tape, it should be, if I get it lined up right, 1.5 inches, which it is. So I know that my stud will fit there. So then basically, I'm always going to make those same marks, 3/4 ahead, 3/4 behind. Every time I see a red mark, which is a red mark, which is my indication that it's another 16. So you don't have to sit here and think of, every multiple of 16. We can just keep looking for the red mark, make my other tick marks, 3/4 ahead, 3/4 behind, and keep rolling. So if my wall was 20 feet long, 30 feet long, however long, I would go through this process all the way down, but I'm just a 4-foot wall. So I'm going to do my 1.5 inches on the other end, and that marks my stud. So now I have all these tick marks on one board, which is sort of helpful, but to really finish out my layout, I will now use my speed square, and this is going to give me, it's not a triangle, it's a speed square. The reason being, you're going to see right now, because it makes a square line. So this has a little lip here, which I'm going to put flat on an edge. And as long as this is pushed up, I don't want it like angled or anything. I want it pushed all the way up. And that's going to give me a perpendicular or square line to my other straight edge. So what I want to do is I want to find my tick marks now, which I have one here. You can do this 2 ways. You can line up and draw your line, or you can put your pencil right on your line, move your square to it, and then draw a square line. And then that's going to help me line up my studs. And then X is the symbol that we use to indicate a stud. And then I'm going to go through and square up all of my marks. Make sure we're marking this. And then one more at this end. Great. And X. Okay, so that is my simple, basic stud wall layout. I wanted to go through a bit more of the wall components. I already built the simple, easy one that I showed you over there. This one is going to have a little mock window in it. It's only 2 foot, so you would never actually use this as a window, but the concept still applies. So I want to look at this drawing down here, which let me know if there's a big shadow or anything sort of in my head. Okay. So this is another drawing of a wall, and it's talking about all the different components that are in the wall. You already know a good amount of these. So we'll start at the bottom. That's my bottom plate that we already went through, top plate, and then this one is a double top plate, which we'll talk about the importance once we get this other wall built. And then my vertical components right here are the studs. And then what we're going to go into next is this window scenario here. So this one, it's talking about the stud that's on the outside of my window, and they're calling it a king stud. Now, this is just indicating that it is part of my window framing. It's the same size as our regular studs, but king is indicating that with the king also goes well, this one calls it trimmers, but I call them jacks. So a king and a jack. A jack is a stud that is cut down to a shorter length because it's going to be supporting the header. So I have my king, my jack that's supporting the header, a king and a jack on the other side that's supporting the header. And the point of the header is basically to distribute the weight in this wall, because I've basically created a gap where there is not a stud where it should normally be running through. Like maybe my 16 inches on center, I would have 2 more studs in this section, which I no longer have. And therefore I need to put a header to transfer that weight. And it's going to be supported by my king, well, my jacks. And depending on how big of an opening you have, depends on or determines what your header is made of. So if I'm doing exterior walls that are load bearing, it's probably a 2x6 header with 1 or 2 jacks. If it was a second jack, it would be another one here that would just provide additional support. And then the bigger the opening, the longer the header, the more jack support it needs under it. And sometimes it'll be a thicker header. So maybe a 2x8 or a 2x10 or some kind of engineered beam if it was like, you know, an open concept, like 10-foot wide opening or something like that. So those are my jacks. Then I have a sill, which just like a window sill, this is going to be the bottom of my box. And then I have my short pieces that are my sill supports that go underneath the sill. And just like the jacks support the header, the sill supports support the sill. So those are kind of the lingo for what we're doing. And a door would be over on this side. A door is the same idea, but no sill and no sill supporters, just your king, jacks, and header. And basically how we would go about doing this whole space inside my door, inside my window, is called my rough opening. That's this RO here. So if you ever needed to figure out what that space is, if you had like a window that you wanted to put into this shed or a door you wanted to use, and you already know the size of the door, you can work backwards. So if I have a 3-0 window, that means it's 3 feet wide. I need my opening to be 3 feet wide so that fits in it. And so in that case, I would work backwards to figure out where do I need to put my kings and jacks. Which that's kind of a little bit more advanced. If anybody wants me to go into that, I can. For the purposes of this workshop, I'm going to keep going with my simple model, which is I'm going to be just building, basically building the window inside of the 2 studs that I already have here. So this is pretty easy because I already have my studs here, which in this scenario, I'm going to just turn these into my kings. Sorry, I drew this to my direction. Oops. So that's my king, and I'm going to add in a jack. And to do that, I'm using a shortcut, which is I know that this is 1.5 inches wide, so I can just line this up and mark over. And this is going to be where my jacks go. And then same thing on the other side. I'm going to make this one my king. And then 1.5 inches over is for my jacks. So then once I know that, we'll bring it over here to, yeah, move this in. To the floor. And so now when I go to actually start building this wall, I have these plates that I've laid out, and it's really important that we don't flip these plates around or twist them or turn them or get them backwards, because I want all these marks to match up, which in this case, it's really simple. But if I had, you know, a bunch of different wall plates laid out, basically you just want them to match so that everything lines up straight and square and where it needs to be. So in order to do that, I'm just going to separate them just like this, and not twist or turn them around. So then, my studs, I've already figured out, these are my 19.5s, which I've already had these pre-cut, but if I needed to at this point, I would cut studs or use pre-cut to length studs, and I'm gonna get a few in place. This is my king stud for my window, but it's the same size as my other one. Another king stud here, and my last one over here. So sorry, just one second. All right, so at this point, I'm ready to start putting together my wall. And just I wanted to go through one thing really quickly. In terms of tools, I wanted to point out the difference between these two hammers. This one right here is a framing hammer. This is like, I don't know how many ounces, but it's kind of heavy. It's pretty long. It's got a nice long handle. A waffle head, and a claw. These are all important features of a hammer for framing because these long, thick nails that we talked about, these are what I'm using to put my wall together. And 3.5 inches is what we're looking for because it goes through 1.5 inches and gives me 2 inches of bearing. If I was just using I would be sticking in just about this much, and that's not really gonna hold my wall together. So big nail, use a big hammer because it'll help you put it together. The hammer next to it is size reference. That's a finish hammer. It's a lot smaller, a lot lighter.
Caitie's screen seems to be frozen here, so give her a second, see if she gets back. Okay, I'm not sure what happened to Caitie, but she's probably trying to rejoin because occasionally she loses connection on her end. So let's see, give her a minute here and see what happens.
Tracy, are we back?
There you
I
are.
don't know.
Now you are. You just got back. I don't know where you went.
I didn't go any further. I have no idea what just happened, but it's kind of weird. As soon as I said disregard, it cut us out.
Yeah, you're back now. We're all good.
Okay. So I was saying disregard this brief blip in the workshop because I'm going to screw this wall together simply for demonstration because if I'm banging on stuff, it's really hard for me to also talk to you about what's going on. So I'm going to screw it together, but in all circumstances, you should be nailing your wall when you frame it, just to make that crystal clear. So if we come over to the walls that I already laid out here, I'm going to be putting on my end studs first, and it's really best to just like pick an end and work start to finish all the way through. And the most important part is I want this flush. Typically what we're looking for in our layout is everywhere there's an X, there's a stud. These lines that we squared are supposed to help me line up. On the very ends, it's trumped by we want to be flush with our plates. So if my line says here and then that means I'm sitting in like this, no good. If my line's here and that means I'm hanging off, no good. So on the end, it's always, we always want to be lining up. So lined up on this, and I also want to be flush going across my top. So if I don't put any pressure on this, I get like a bump here. I don't want that. I want it nice and flat and flush. And then I'm going to go ahead and nail it together. Okay, to be fair, that's also loud, but it's a lot faster, so we can keep going with our workshop. So I'm going to do this same thing all the way across. This one I will be watching my layout lines, especially on doors and windows. If I'm building this to a certain length, I don't want to be a 1/4 inch off on anything. So I want to be flush across the top, lined up between these two lines, and nail it in. Same thing, you got 2 more on this side to do. And this is the other side of my window. So it's a king, but marked out the same way, or same size, sorry, as a jack.
If you were using nails, would you pre-drill holes?
No. So if I were using it,
Caitie, your sound is cutting out again.
Your sheet sounds cutting out.
okay, so
I think you might be frozen.
Okay. We can see you, Caitie.
okay. Oh, sorry. I thought we were frozen for a
No,
second.
you're good. So the question was about nails.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a demo of nails because that is what we're here for. So if I were doing nails, basically you don't need a pre-drill. This is just because I've already used this piece of wood before, but I'm gonna start my nail by just a couple taps to get it pre-started, and then once I get it started, then I can move my hands back and nail it a little harder. And I want my nail to be going all the way flush, so I don't want my nail head like sticking out at all. I want it all the way in. And if you were building a wall that was 8 or 9 feet, it would be a lot heavier, and so you wouldn't be banging and sliding as much. This is like a 2-pound wall, so it's kind of hard to hold it together, but this is the nailing version. And that also gives you an idea of the hammer size. If you're using that super small light hammer, it would be pretty tricky to get it all put together. Having a bit of a time with my slippery floor, so I'm gonna have to screw in my other piece. I'm hope you guys got the idea on this.
Yeah, the video and the audio are kind of in and out both. So is everybody more or less able to follow along with this? Okay. Oh, and it's showing that your bandwidth is low. Well, that explains it.
Is it off Wi-Fi?
Yeah.
Would it help if we stop our videos?
I don't think so. It's on her end.
Okay.
I'm trying to get just off my Wi-Fi, Tracy, and see if that
Okay.
does anything. I don't know what
Yeah.
else to do.
I know, you're okay. You're with us for now.
Okay, so
Just let us know if it starts cutting out again, okay?
Yeah, we'll do.
I more or less finished my cheater wall of screws. So I would do that same thing again for the top of my wall. I'm gonna kind of speed through so we can finish our window opening tonight. And I want the same thing. I want to be lined up on the top as well. Okay. You also, when we are doing a 2x4 wall, we want 2 nails going into each end of our stud. If we were using a 2x6 for our wall, we would do 3 nails. So it's thicker, it's a beefier wall. We want 3 nails going through. Okay, at this point, I'm going to move forward with the window opening, which means my jacks are going in next. So the jacks, again, are these shorter pieces that are going inside my window to support my header, or I guess jacks I would use for a window or a door. So again, these are shorter, and these I would have to figure out what the actual size of my opening, my rough opening is. So for this demonstration, I just built it inside a regular stud bay. So here are my jacks. Then for my header, I'm using 2x4s because that's the material I have. If I were to be doing this in a load-bearing wall or an exterior wall, it would be a 2x6 header. And basically this is going to go vertically. I don't know how to say this. Words. I'm going to be putting it like this instead of up and down like this. So my header is actually going to be a sandwich of 2 2x4s and then some material. It could either be 1/2-inch OSB or like the blue foam. That's what Habitat uses, either OSB or blue foam. And that's going to be going inside my header like this. So it's going to make a sandwich. And the reason is because that is going to fur it out to be 3.5 inches, which is the thickness of my 2x4 wall, right? So if I measure my top plate, 3.5 inches, I need this header to also be 3.5 inches. So I would put in that material to fur out my height here. And then my header is going to sit, hopefully, sit inside my wall here. Although I haven't done it here, we would put the whole header sandwich together as one piece, and then we put it into our wall. Okay, and then it would look like this. my king jacks, I would nail in the same way, 2 nails in, and then the king jacks get nailed together. I'm not going to go through all that because it's redundant of me just hammering nails or screws. So in the fashion of learning, we're going to keep moving. Then my window sill, that's the piece that's going to be supporting my creating the bottom of my window opening, basically. Unlike the header, which we put this way, our sill is going to go like this. That's because it's not, its purpose isn't to transfer weight or anything. It's just to finish making my box, basically. So my sill is going to be based on the opening. So I would put my sill at the predetermined height. So like, let's say I had a 3 foot by 5 foot window. I would make sure that this opening is actually 3 feet. Make sure I'm going 5 feet down from my header, and that gets me right here. And that's where my sill goes. I would attach this in and then put my sill supports underneath and nail my sill into those as well. And then nail these to my king jacks. So that is basically the components for window framing. And then just like we saw in the diagram, if this was a door, it would be the same setup with the header and king jacks, just minus the sills and cripples.
If your window isn't like directly up against the top plate, how would you put the header in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if Michaela just asked a question, like in this example, I just picked it. It doesn't really matter. But let's say I had a window that was going to be, you know, totally centered in this wall or something. Basically, I would adjust my jack height to lower my header within this space. And then I would put supports like the cripple supports. I would put those above the header too. And so my header would be, oh, it's really jammed in there. Let's say if my header was at this point in my wall, I would also have the supports here. Then I would have my sill and supports there. And the supports that go above the header, that wouldn't be for any kind of weight. Like all of your weight, the transfer of weight would still be in the king jack setup and transferred by the header. So the supports above the header is basically to get us back on for our 16 on center for nailing off our sheathing and our drywall. We're still going to be putting those things over our wall. So if I just, is that confusing? So if I had a 3 foot opening and I didn't have anything to nail it into over my door or over my window, then I would just have like a loose flap of drywall or OSB. So we want to put those back in, and those would be on 16 on center, just like my cripple or my sill supports underneath my windowsill. All of those should still be 16 on center. So
is it on center from the king or the jack, or what is the 16 measured from?
The 16 is from wherever I start my layout. So in this case, I started my layout from this side. So if a 16 fell above the door, I would need to add that in. So the layout always starts from the same point, which would always be the left side of your wall. So you should always pull your tape measure from there, and every 16-inch, that's where the starting point is. That clarifies, hopefully. Okay, so.
And the on center part means that the stud falls, the center of the stud is at 16 inches.
Correct. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is sort of put these walls together, which this one isn't totally nailed off, but it's pretty close. So okay, so what I've kind of arranged to set up is a situation where we could see these two walls going together. And basically in this case, can you come over to this corner, please? In this case, what we would need to do to actually join these together is to make sure that my whole corner lines up. So I want to make sure I'm starting at the bottom, getting it lined up flush here, and then making sure I stay flush all the way up the top as I secure this. And the way that I would
You're frozen again. So the way you'd secure it is well, let's see. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everybody. We've struggled with this a little bit in the past, but tonight is especially challenging. We'll give Caitie another minute here to see if she makes it back. Caitie, how are you doing? We can't see or hear you. Oh, there she is. Let's see. Now we can see you, but still can't hear you. Actually, you're muted. I don't know if you can hear us. You can.
How about now?
There you go. All right. We can see you and hear you, but you're sideways.
Oh.
No, you're not. All right, there we go.
Okay, I don't know what's going on. We're getting kind of close to the end, but I hope it'll hold through for us. So
yeah, you lost us at how you secure it.
Yep, okay, great. So how I secure it is by putting a nail. I would be lining this up here at the bottom, and then I'm going to be nailing through this wall into this stud on the end of my next one to join me in. And then I'm going to work my way all the way up the wall, making sure that I stay flush all the way to the top. And that's how I would join together my corners. And if I was building a shed or a house, I would do that obviously on all four corners. And then we put on our cap plate or our double top plate, which I've referred to a couple times and we saw in the diagram. And this is basically an additional 2x4 that's going to go on top of all of my other top plates. So around the whole outside, over all of my interior walls, gets a double top plate. And if we look down at the wall here, we can see I have a seam right here. And my double top plate is basically adding additional support to any breaks or seams in my wall. So if I have a corner here, my double top plate is going to overlap that seam. And I'm going to be going straight with this wall all the way to the edge of this wall. And basically what that's going to be doing, it's not quite straight. Basically what that's going to do is tie together any breaks in my wall, which are my weakest points. So I would do that on all of my corners, on all of my interior walls, always making sure that my second layer overlaps the gap. If I just put these all on like this, then I'm not really adding any additional support. So always do my double top plate like that. Okay. So then after that, kind of getting towards my last steps in my framing process. But after that comes my sheathing. So that's the OSB and plywood that we talked about. I'm going to be using OSB because it has that shear strength. And there are kind of two sides to OSB. This side is a little bit rougher and has lines on it. This side is kind of a bit smoother and no lines. I want to have the line side facing out. That is because these lines are, I'll show you on this side. These lines are already 16 inches on center. So if I look behind my wall, I know that if I'm nailing here, I'm on a stud, which is important. So for this, I built my wall to be 2 foot. So that comes, it's hard when they're not all actually tied together, but that should get me just to the top of my top plate and all the way to the bottom. And when I go to put this on, just like my studs, just like tying my wall together, I want this to be flush with the edge of my wall. So I would be flush all the way like this. And then if I put another piece on this side, I would overlap it with the wall that I tied it to and this piece of OSB. So I always have a nice clean corner. If I just ran the OSB on this side to here, I would end up with like a funky corner, and we don't want that. We want it nice and clean. So our siding or our trim, whatever is going to get covered over that, has a nice smooth corner. So for my sheathing, I would use those smaller nails, right? The 8s, which I would use my 8s, and this one that I'm holding here happens to be galvanized, but we don't actually need galvanized if we're going to be putting siding and paint and getting it all dried in. But my 8s, it's just going to be going through my 1/2 inch, and then you can see I still have a lot of bearing left, but I don't really need that big 16D nail that we were using for the studs. That would be a lot of overkill for holding in this sheathing, right? Am I still with you guys? Hope so.
Sorry, I'm muted. Yes, you're still here.
Okay, great. Just want to see. I'm sort of through, yeah, I think I've covered most everything. If anybody has questions, start thinking of those. I do have one other thing I wanted to briefly talk about, which is if we needed to alter something in a wall or do some kind of like demo or reframing to a wall that already exists. So I'm going to talk about that. And if anybody has questions, I'm kind of winding down in the workshop. So think of those and let me know. Okay, okay, so in this example we're going to be going through, let's say I did all this work to my window and I'm going to put my window in and it doesn't fit, right? I did something wrong with my math. I miscalculated and I need to make it bigger or make it smaller or whatever. In some way I need to alter my framing. In that case, couple options. One, you can always use a sledgehammer or a big hammer and just knock stuff out and start over. And that would be fine, great, you can do that. The other way, which is a bit more calculated, is using a sawzall like this, sawzall or a reciprocating saw, and basically this blade is going to move in and out. And we can use this to cut through our nails that are holding together our studs. And in that case, it would be a bit more controlled to take something out. So this is a battery one, which I'm not actually going to cut through a whole stud, but I wanted to show the reciprocating saw just moves back and forth like that. That was not full speed, that was just so you guys can see it. But if I wanted to cut out something in this wall, basically I could take my Sawzall and just run it flat against my plate and get in between and cut those two nails, right? It's just two nails. So I could do that at the top and at the bottom and take out, you know, one side of my window and make it bigger or make it smaller or cut something in place. So that would be for kind of a controlled demo or framing alteration, we'll say. Any questions on that? I don't know if that concept fully makes sense without a more in-depth description, but yeah, I just wanted to cover that briefly so you don't have to build everything from scratch. You can certainly work with what you already have or add or adjust as needed. Yeah, that's pretty much what I got for framing. So I hope that you learned something tonight. This is like, by all means, a pretty basic intro into framing. So we did cover a lot of the big concepts, but of course, the bigger the project, the more, you know, the scale changes, the details. When you have 6 different window sizes or door sizes, it could start to get complicated. But if you understand this, then you are certainly well on your way to a great home project, home renovation, shed, anything like that. Yeah, so I hope you guys learned something. Hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions after the workshop, you can ask me or ask Tracy and she can get in touch with me. Otherwise, we're offering, please offer your feedback on what you liked, what you would change. If you want to learn additional topics, we're always looking for suggestions. And like Tracy said, we got a full 6 months scheduled out. So there's lots of stuff coming up and I hope we'll see you guys again.
Yeah, thank you for joining. Tomorrow we will send a link out that has a link to the video here and a survey. So if you don't mind taking that survey, letting us know. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties. We've had problems before, but tonight was particularly difficult. So thank you for everybody for sticking with us and got a few people chatting in. Thanks. So thanks a lot, Caitie and Michaela. Have a good night. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Caitie.
Take care.
Take care.